Hey, welcome everyone into the Wells Tech Garage for this month's episode of TechConnect. I am out here to answer that question from the last broadcast, as well as going over a couple of the comments that you guys had. So I really want to get into this thing right away. So as you guys can see, we got a setup here in front of you, a little bit interesting. In this canister on my left, we are looking at 93 octane fuel sitting in this one. And on this one on the right, we're looking at E85 fuel sitting in there, just so you guys know right off the bat what is in these two containers, okay? Also, they are both rigged up with matching GM-style fuel tank pressure sensors. So remember, these are under pressure. They will go lower in voltage, and under vacuum, they should raise in voltage. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to seal both of these containers up. And let's just take a quick peek at our lab scope, and I'll get to the point of why I'm doing this in just a second here. Okay? So both containers are currently sealed. And let's take a look at our lab scope. I'm going to go ahead and just restart it here. And let's just grab 1 second per division, and we should see our voltages right around the same spot because these are mirror images of each other. And they're very close. Looks like I might have a little bit of a skewed reading. That reading over here on channel 2 is a little bit fuzzy, but they are very close in voltage. So what I want to do while I'm going over all of this is we're going to sit and we're going to watch these over a pretty long time interval. We're going to kind of watch these in the background. Now, as you guys can see by this shot right here, our fuel in both of these canisters are warm, okay? You know, we're looking roughly, what is that, maybe 85, we'll call it 85 degrees in both of our fuel containers here. So both of our fuels are warm, and as you can see, the table that they're sitting on is significantly colder. So our fuel should begin to condense, and then you can also see like the room here, like this Toyota that's sitting here, about 80 degrees or so roughly in the room. So in theory, as we're sitting here talking, as we're going through this and I'm explaining everything, we should, in theory, see some changes in our pressures as this thing is sitting. So this would be the same as that intrusive or non-intrusive systems on Toyota. This would be the same as them sitting, or the vehicle sitting, for any extended period of time. Remember, those are sealed systems. We have a sealed system right here that we are monitoring over time. We currently have warm fuel that is cooling off to room temperature, okay? So as you guys can tell already on the scope, we are seeing a decrease in our readings right here, meaning that they are slightly building pressure inside of there. So that's interesting. But we'll watch this over time and see how it goes. Now let's get into the last class. Let's start with the question. The question was, a newer vehicle is failing emissions for a very small leak code. The PCM uses the engine off natural vacuum leak detection to run the very small leak test. It was July 13th, and of course the registration for the vehicle is due the next day. As a temporary repair, the technician siphoned fuel out of his plow truck and put it into the newer car's fuel tank. The technician then ran the monitor and passed the emissions, and the question was, why? Why is this possible to happen? Now, I also gave you guys a clue that it was not a gas cap. You know, simply taking the gas cap off to siphon fuel in there and then clicking the cap back tight was not the answer. So I got a lot of different answers from you guys. The most common was fuel level, right? So beforehand, the fuel level was too low to run the test. So by the technician adding fuel, it brought it back into testable parameters. But that doesn't answer why there's a leak in the system. If the system was too low on fuel level to run the test, then it was too low on fuel level to fail the very small leak test, okay? So fuel level itself was not the answer. Now there are a few people that went a little bit further and brought up that the fuel level could end up above the filler neck input on the gas tank. Basically, the fuel would then seal off the filler neck, you know, similar to our Grand Am that we had worked on in the one of our last episodes, you know, something similar to that. But I guess that's kind of an answer. I don't know that it's the answer that I was hoping that you guys would give, but it is kind of the answer. And I guess I did accept it for the people who wrote that back, because they are right. Adding fuel, bringing it up above that could have an effect, I suppose. But if you ask me, I would assume that whoever engineered that EVAP leak test on that vehicle would know that above, let's call it 60% fuel level, the filler neck would be blocked off and the very small leak test would be pointless. So I would assume that that would be written in the coding for the test somewhere. So that kind of nullifies that as well. So what was the answer? What is the answer to this question? Well, it's all about fuel. It's all about the fuel properties. It's all about the type of fuel that's in there, and specifically winter fuel and summer fuel. Now, I was very, in the question, I was very specific with quite a few different things in there. First of all, I said the date, July 13th. So we have to figure that it's probably warm out, right? Unless you live in the Arctic Circle, it's probably warm out on July 13th. Then I also mentioned that he siphoned fuel out of his plow truck. Now, for the most part, how many people use a plow truck during the summer? I know at the shop that I used to work at, the plow truck sat in the back of the lot with all of that old winter fuel sitting in there all summer until it was time to use the vehicle again the following winter. So we have winter gas sitting in the plow truck that was siphoned into a vehicle that is currently running on summer gas. So what's the difference here? What is the difference, and why does it matter to us, besides the fact that winter gas is commonly cheaper? Well, let's first talk about, before we figure out what the exact difference is, I think we should first draw up what our engine off natural vacuum leak detection test looks like. That way we can lay all this out in a manner that is easy to follow. So I'm going to draw out a graph, okay? So over here, we are going to have pressure. And you can have whatever PID you want, kPa, millimeters of Hg, psi, whatever the heck you want over there, doesn't matter. We're going to be very generic for this part. And then down here, we are going to have time. And again, the scale, we don't really care because, again, we're being generic. We could talk in seconds, minutes, whatever you want to talk about. Okay? And then we're going to draw a line roughly centered here. That's supposed to be a straight line. This right here is going to be 0. Okay? So whatever unit that you're working in, this is our 0 mark. So anything below would be vacuum, anything above would be pressure, right? Makes sense. So engine off natural leak detection vehicles will have an open system that would close during testing. So this thing sat for that 5-hour window, which the technician forced, by the way, forced that 5-hour window past with the scan tool because he ran the monitor. So he forces that 5-hour window past. So we start the test. Okay, we're going to start the test right here all the way to the left side. The PCM watches our fuel tank pressure sensor for a certain amount of time to just know where it is, to kind of let the system breathe, figure out exactly what's happening. And then at that point, the PCM closes up our vent solenoid. So we're going to seal the system, right? Our purge solenoid is closed because the engine is currently off and it's not having power or ground supplied to it. But these systems are able to turn the vent solenoid on while the vehicle's sitting. So we're going to draw a line right here, and this is going to be our vent. Blue is going to be vent turning on. So when our vent solenoid turns on, our fuel tank pressure is going to do one of two things. We're going to seal the tank, and our pressure is either going to increase or our pressure is going to decrease depending on temperature. If the fuel is hot, it would increase in temperature because hot fuel is more gaseous. It's going to create more fumes. If the fuel is cooling and condensing, well, then we're going to go into vacuum on that system. Now, there are thresholds that need to be accomplished in order to pass the test. So let's say that we have a threshold right here. Okay? If our tank closes, or excuse me, if our system closes our vent solenoid and our fuel tank pressure rises enough that we cross this threshold right here, at that point right there, we pass the test. Okay? The system is very happy. It's it's done with the test. The test is over. All right? But now let's say that our time window expanded too much, and maybe our fuel tank pressure did not increase enough. You know, maybe it was like one of these right here. Okay? So we haven't crossed our threshold, but we've spent too much time looking at it now. So now what do? We reopen the vent solenoid. We want to bring the system back to a normal state. So this is going to be, I'll just label this as open, and then this is going to be our vent closed, okay? So our vent solenoid opens at this point. So now that little bit of pressure that we had in here would bleed out almost immediately, as long as our system's not restricted. So now we're, you know, hovering back around that 0 line because we have a system that's vented atmospherically. It's going to just have atmospheric pressure inside of it, okay? Now, at this point, the vehicle's been sitting a pretty long time. We're going to reclose the vent solenoid. All right, so vent closed. All right, now, so our pressure was kind of just hanging out near 0. Now when our vent closes again, our system is going to go into vacuum. This is something, as far as from what I was reading, is always going to happen. At this point here, we could go vacuum or pressure, but on this second closing of the vent solenoid, we will almost always build vacuum inside here. So then we should see something start to happen like this, okay? And again, there's going to be, you know, a threshold that we need to overcome with our vacuum, okay? If we overcome our threshold down here, we pass the test, okay? So if our pressure increases past this threshold at any point in this time window right here, we're good to go. We pass the test, we're done. If this fails here, okay, if we have a big fat X here, and we have one of these lines, doesn't pass our threshold, we go into step 2, reopen the vent, let the system normalize, and then close the vent and watch it again. And then from there, we cycle the vent again and make sure that that vacuum bleeds off quickly. But what I'm really concerned about, guys, is the first part of the test today, and that's really what is going to pertain to our question today. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to erase a majority of our graph right here, because what we're going to be focusing on is the first part. And that first part is the simple pass-fail. Does it get past our pressure or not? So, okay, let's just draw our threshold back in here. Let's draw our, about like so. And let's just bring that vent close line back in right there. Excuse me, vent open. Okay, so that's going to look like that. There's our threshold, okay? So currently, and this is our 0 line right there, all right? So currently, this would be like the vehicle that's being talked about in the question. We are building pressure slightly, but we're not building enough pressure to pass our test. Our test is not passing the threshold right here. We're failing, and we're failing within a small amount of time. Excuse me. So we would then go on to the next step, and then at that point we would be setting the very small leak code. Now, how is it that this technician was able to add a different type of fuel and pass this test? All right, well, that all comes down to the RVP, the read vapor pressure of fuel. Now, I'm not going to get into it very deep here, because as a technician, we really don't, I don't want to say that we don't care, but it's not something that we're going to be using on a daily basis, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. But I need to just briefly talk about it. So we have RVP equals read vapor pressure, okay? That is the pressure that fuel exerts at 100 degrees Fahrenheit. There's a test, there's parameters that are structured by, you know, all those testing agencies out there, that we are looking to have our read vapor pressure at a certain level, okay? Normal standard gasoline is rated at a 9 psi or under. So anything less than 9 psi is acceptable for our read vapor pressure. Now, what exactly is read vapor pressure? Well, that's kind of a measurement of fuel volatility. All right, that's going to be the pressure that is exerted by our fuel at 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So normal summer blend gasoline is rated at 9 psi. Now, if we think back, probably on older cars more so, or if you store a car during the winter that's maybe full of summer fuel, it starts up hard in the winter, right? They crank longer, they could even misfire or run rough at idle if they have summer fuel in them in the winter. And that's because the volatility is not high enough in the winter and those extreme cold temperatures, okay? So in the winter, we see our RVP somewhere around the 15 psi mark, and that's rough. We can see it as high as the 15 psi mark. And here in Wisconsin, I believe that's somewhere between September and like March, somewhere in there when we're experiencing cold weather. We need to up the volatility of our fuel, and the way it does that is it adds, the gas makers add butane into our fuel, and that increases our volatility, increases our RVP, which makes our vehicles start a little bit easier. But the bad thing about this is now our fuel can boil off easier, and if you have an uncharacteristically hot day in the middle of winter, you could end up with vapor lock issues because the fuel is boiling now because it is a higher RVP in a hot temperature. Okay, so what does this all mean? How does this exactly refer to our test? And actually, before I get to that, I just want to show you guys this little graph right here. So here on our screen is the RVP of gasoline, somewhere between 7 and 16. So 7 is the spec in certain areas that are very tightly emission controlled. So I'm thinking like the Lake Corridor here in Wisconsin, so Sheboygan, Milwaukee, down through Chicago, California. They all have these certain more strict emissions because anything that's high, the higher the number, the higher the emissions output, and also the higher volatile the fuel is. So gasoline, standard gasoline in the center here, RVP of 7 to 16. Then we have E85 here at a 7 to 12, and an ethanol at a 2.3 reading. Okay? So one more thing with RVP. If we add ethanol into our fuel, the government says that we're now allowed to add 1 psi to this, giving us a total of 10 psi. Okay? So that's just good to note for those of you guys that want to know that spec. 10% ethanol is granted an additional single psi of RVP, which could in turn change some things. So what does this really matter? What does ethanol matter? Why does RVP matter for our test? Well, it's all about building those vapors or condensing those vapors inside of the fuel tank, and how quickly and how much pressure that incurs, okay? So we have this system, right? And it's summer out. It's 85 degrees or whatever it is. Let's say it's July 13th, you know, when we had the last class, July 13th, and let's just say that on July 13th it was 85 degrees Fahrenheit that day, okay? Apologize for my bad handwriting, but 85 degrees, July 13th, it's hot out, all right? We have a high volatile fuel that was just added into our gas tank. That fuel is going to want to evaporate and build pressure very quickly. We seal our system up, we force the 5-hour monitor past. What's going to happen inside of our gas tank? We have hot, high volatile fuel that's not meant to be this temperature. You know, this 15 psi, this is usually down around, you know, here in Wisconsin, down closer to the 0 degree Fahrenheit, 20 degree Fahrenheit mark is in the winter when we're going to see this. So we're uncharacteristically hot. It's the middle of summer, 85 degrees. Now our pressure inside of our tank is going to increase. All right, we have this high volatile fuel. Now we're still in the same fuel tank, right? We're still in the tank that failed the test, but now we're building pressure faster and more pressure. So is it possible that a higher volatile fuel, being this 15 or so psi RVP fuel, this winter blend fuel in our gas tank, builds up pressure faster and more efficiently and actually falsely passes our very small leak test? Completely possible. This test right here, like I said, if we can get to our threshold in this certain amount of time, if we can reach that, our test is done. We're not going to go and even finish the test. If we were able to build pressure in our fuel tank above the threshold in that small amount of time, must mean that we don't have a leak, right? You can't build pressure in something that's leaking. That just doesn't make sense. So why doesn't this happen in the winter? Why don't we pass every emissions test in the winter? Well, that's because this high RVP fuel right here is then not going to be gassing as much when we're down around, let's say we're around, let's just call it 20 degrees, okay? So it's a pretty cool day, 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Now our 15 psi fuel is probably going to act a lot more like this would in the middle of summer, okay? So, and also, our computer is going to change this threshold up or down dependent upon two factors. So it's going to be dependent on our intake air temp and our fuel level are both going to be vital, important factors for determining this, where this threshold sits and the amount of vapor generation or vapor decay that we should have inside of our fuel tank, okay? So, that being said, is it possible that a car running winter blend fuel in the middle of winter, say we had an uncharacteristically hot day, say it's January 5th and normal average high for that day in Wisconsin is, let's say, 22 degrees, and all of a sudden that day, for whatever reason, we hit 80 degrees that day. Is it possible that this same thing could happen on those very small leak cars? Definitely. We could have a falsely passing leak test because of the RVP and the vapor generation inside of our fuel tank on a hot day. All right? So it's all about the way the fuel gases, all about the way the fuel creates vapors and how much pressure those vapors can make. The higher the RVP number, the more volatile the fuel and also the worse for emissions the fuel is. So, unfortunately, because it is summer in Wisconsin, I'm unable to get any winter blend fuel. So I had to go with what I have available, E85 and 93 octane, no ethanol. And I had to use these because, well, that's what I've got. And they are different. So on the chart here, we're looking between a 7 to 16 for regular gas and between a 7 and 12 for E85. So I would assume our regular gas to be somewhere around that 9 mark right now. What I think is interesting here is pure ethanol has a super, super low RVP of only 2.3. So you would think if you add ethanol to your fuel that your RVP would go down, right? You would decrease in RVP. But why is it then that the government allows an extra PSI? Well, there's some chemical reactions that happen in the fuel, and I'm not going to get into the chemistry of it, but basically, small amounts of ethanol added to gasoline actually increase the RVP until we cross a threshold, okay? And here's what I'm talking about. As you can see here, 0% alcohol in our fuel. Our RVP is roughly 9 or so PSI, all right? Now we add in 10% ethanol. We are currently at 10 PSI. What is this, maybe 15% ethanol? We are currently still at 10 PSI. Now we're up to 20, 25%, 30%, and now our RVP is starting to drop, okay? Keep cruising here. We get to about 85 or so. E85 puts us here. This is looking like it's about 5.5 PSI for our E85 fuel right here. And then if we get all the way to straight ethanol, we are at a 2 PSI. So that's the chemistry of how it is. Now we've been having the lab scope up on the screen, right? Let's see where that's sitting. All right, so it looks like here that our voltages are on the way back up. Let's go back up. Oops. No, I just lost it all. Sorry, guys. Let's see where we're at right now, though. I'm not going to change. I'm not going to open these canisters right now. But our fuel pressures look like they're further apart than where they started. And that would be because of the different pressure ratings that these fuels are going to put out, okay? So our red channels are E85. And our blue channel is our 93 no ethanol fuel. And you can see there right where I touched it, right here, you can actually see where the pressure slightly increased. But now if we were to watch this for a long amount of time, we should see these things build up to a different pressure or vacuum reading, okay? We should see over time the RVP will affect how these things will fill up their canisters with vapors, okay? So that is basically how this entire thing is going to work, and that is how adding winter fuel to that car could make it pass the test. Is that something that I recommend doing? Definitely not, guys. That is somebody else who had gotten it right said it was kind of a shady way to do things. I totally agree. but I wanted you guys to understand that it's the possibility that it could happen. We need to understand how the entire system works and how our fuel quality and our fuel condition and our fuel state, whether it's winter blend or summer blend fuel, how that's going to affect everything. Now, if we throw in E85 into the mix, knowing that that has a different RVP, read vapor pressure, that's going to throw things off too. Let's say you're working on a flex fuel vehicle, and that flex fuel vehicle has either a flex fuel sensor or a algorithm that determines the ethanol content in the fuel. Okay? Well, we know already, judging by that chart, that our RVP of our ethanol is different than the RVP of our gas. So let's say that that E85 vehicle thinks that it's currently running on normal gasoline. Okay, so it sets its threshold right here for normal gasoline. All right, but for whatever reason, it hasn't updated itself, and there's E85 in the tank currently. So you would probably be running into lean codes or something like that, but let's say that it doesn't have lean codes yet, okay? Let's say that the vehicle hasn't set those lean codes yet. There is E85 in the fuel tank, and the vehicle is thinking that you're just running standard 87 octane fuel. So we could end up seeing something that would look like this. So here's our threshold. This is what we're trying to cross, and we have E85 in the tank. Well, our RVP of E85 is lower than standard gasoline, meaning over this time window between here and here, we're going to build up less pressure. Okay, so maybe we come to here. You know, we're still not crossing our threshold right there, right? Our threshold, our RVP, our pressure, our fuel tank pressure sensor is reading lower than our threshold, even though we don't have a leak, and this could be all because the RVP of our fuel is lower. So you run through your tank of E85, you put standard, regular 87 octane in there. Now your pressure could look something like this, okay? Same system, no leaks in the system, no problems with the system, but our differing types of fuels can cause this. Now, I would, again, this is an assumption, but I would think on an intelligent newer vehicle that we have nowadays, the ethanol sensors, so I would think on an E85 vehicle, we're going to see an added pit in here. We would want to see ethanol content. So I'm just going to put ethanol content there. Our ethanol content is going to be vital as well, because I would assume that that would then change our threshold here. So we have E85 in the tank. Well, maybe with E85, maybe our threshold is here now. Okay, so now we've passed our threshold appropriately. There's no problem in this system whatsoever. The computer just needed to adjust itself for the different type of fuel. So ethanol plays a factor into this. Winter, summer blend fuels play a factor into this. Fuel in general is huge for our EVAP system, right? Our goal is to capture the vapors, and our engineers have developed testing parameters and information of what it's supposed to do, and we can always throw a wrench into that, right? We understand the system. We can figure out how to do things that maybe the engineers hadn't planned for. So a little bit of fun playing. I hope this all makes sense to you guys. Let's just take a look at our pressure here. It looks to me like our E85 is remaining relatively the same, and our 93 octane is increasing in voltage here, which means, again, that we are decreasing in pressure. We're building vacuum inside of this canister, and that would make sense as we are, let's bring up our thermal camera again, as we are cooling our fuel. So we're now down to 83 or so. So as our fuel is cooling, we're going to start condensing those vapors and starting to build vacuum inside of these canisters. I'm sure you guys have seen this with your sealed gas canisters at home. If they're hot, they're going to expand real big, and then if they sit overnight and it gets cold, they're going to suck themselves together. Well, that's exactly what could happen here as well, and what we're doing is just watching our pressure differential. So you can definitely tell that our blue line seems to be moving more than our red line, and that's because our RVP, read vapor pressure, of our 93 octane is higher than that of our E85. Let's go back one page and take a peek here. So I'm going to just grab two tracers here and just get a quick measurement of a straight line For whatever reason, our red channel here is kind of messy looking. For whatever reason, I apologize for that. But as you guys can tell, the distances here are much greater. So our blue channel has gained, if we do the math in here, roughly 100 millivolts or so, where our red channel, let's try and get it right about, it's really hard to tell where this thing is actually sitting because of the messiness of it, and I apologize for that, guys. I wish this was a lot cleaner looking for you. So our red channel is sitting right about there, so about 1.5 volts actually. That doesn't seem quite right. So, oh, well, now we're reading 0.2. So it's hard to know exactly where this is going to sit. Let's actually see if we can just zoom in here. All right, so beginning to end of this, you're looking at just under 0.1 volts, and we'll call this the beginning here. And oh, there's a lot of movement in this one. I don't know if that's when I was bumping the bottle, maybe. So beginning to end here, probably right about there. You're looking at only about half of a 0.05 of a volt. Okay, so we are noticing a difference in this thing. Let's see where we're at right now. Let's just bring it back to live on our scope. And again, if we let these things sit for a long time, we would really start to see the graphs are not going to move in the same direction. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to erase this. So over time, what in theory we would see, we'll have black be our 93 octane. It is a higher RVP. So we're going to see, as that system condenses, we're going to see a line something like this, where this was atmospheric. And then if we have blue be our E85, we'll see something similar like that, okay? We'll see it scale slower and reach a final pressure reading of something different, okay? As it builds towards that point. So we should see in our scope, we should see that blue line become very close to that red line as it scales up. So, all right, that is the gist of that and answering that question. I hope that all makes sense for you guys. If you have any questions about RVP, or if you want me to do a full class on this at some point, we can definitely get into it. But as a technician, again, I don't know how often you're going to be using something like that, because it's not very often that we're dealing with those interesting circumstances, okay? All right, let's just get back here real quick, and I just want to answer a couple of the comments that you guys had. You guys were super talkative again. I really do appreciate that. Keith, thanks for the super chat, donating the $1. And again, like I talked about in the broadcast, guys, we're not out here, Wells Vehicle Electronics out here for our training. We're not out here to make money off of you guys. We are out here to support our product and to give you guys the training and the information that you deserve. So please, Keith, I do really appreciate it from New Level Auto. I appreciate it, but we do not, we don't need donations from you guys, okay? So Ozstar came out, he said, what is the easiest way to tell if you are dealing with a non-intrusive system or an intrusive system without getting underneath the car? Well, two ways, I guess, is how I would look at it. One would be using a wiring diagram and seeing in that diagram if you have a CCV, a canister closed valve. If you do, you know that that's going to be an intrusive style system because the intrusive style uses a CCV. You could also check, you could look at fuel tank pressure sensor location. Remember on the intrusive system, you'll usually find the fuel tank pressure sensor mounted in the tank itself, and on a non-intrusive, you will usually find it mounted to the canister, and I don't have one sitting here, but the canister that we used last time, the fuel tank pressure sensor was mounted directly to that. So you could use that as well. Then Arbez Auto came out, and he said, fish tank and the picoscope, it's going to be a good video. Well, I'm glad you guys appreciate the little fish tank that I built. I know there were a lot of comments about the ducks and how they were inverted in there, and we should switch over the settings on the scope, see if we can get them uninverted. For whatever reason, they just like to float upside down. But I'm glad you guys appreciate that demo. It took a lot of time to build that thing up and get it sealed to where I'm not leaking green food colored water all over the place. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate you guys enjoying the usage of that with the scope and the demos on that. And oh, moving up DIY, had mentioned the fuel tank pressure sensor location as being one of those ways to deal with figuring out non-intrusive or intrusive. Okay guys, I think that's about it. Our next class is going to be August 3rd. We are going to be back at Toyota. We're going to be covering the Avalon that I had in the shop last time. We're going to be covering the key-off leak detection pump system that Toyota is using on most of their vehicles now. I also have had a comment on the Toyota Prius EVAP system. I'm going to try and cover some of that. Those vehicles are a little bit harder to find. But if I am able to get my hands on one before the class next week, I will try, fingers crossed, try to get a Toyota in here so we can at least play around with some live data and some PIDs on that Prius, okay? So I really appreciate you guys being there. That's about it. So check us out social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter. Search for Wells Vehicle Electronics. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe if you haven't already. The button is right below here. Click that red subscribe button. And make sure to thumbs up the video and leave comments below. Let me know how I'm doing. Let me know what you guys think. So really appreciate you being there. We'll see you guys next week, Thursday, August 3rd, for our Toyota EVAP class on our leak detection pump on our Toyota Avalon. So have a great weekend, everyone. Happy wrenching.